Simon here for my fourth and final missions moment video. For this video, I'm going to talk about Donald McGravan, and this is largely coming out of the 17th chapter of our textbook for the course. The chapter is entitled The Church Growth Movement, and Donald McGravan is largely accredited with being the founder of what we now refer to as the Church Growth Movement. McGravan was a 20th century missionary. He grew up in India, had missionary parents in India. Eventually, he returned to India to work as a missionary himself for a good portion of his adult life. Eventually, he came back to the States to begin his writing and teaching ministry. And in the 1950s, he wrote a book entitled The Bridges of God. This was the first of several where Donald McGravan was essentially really calling into question the institution of the missions world, I suppose, as it existed at that time. His experience on the mission field really led him to the conviction that God wanted to reach entire people groups. And he just wasn't seeing a whole lot of missional effectiveness. He was sort of pushing back against things like if a missionary would say something like, well, I may not be super fruitful, but at least I'm faithful. And for McGravan, he felt like that was kind of an excuse. And so he was really passionate. He was a pragmatist, and he was really passionate about seeing results. He believed that when God was beginning to move in a particular area, God would open a window for effective evangelism. And he believed that instead of just reaching a few people and then sort of perfecting them or focusing on just the pastoral care of a few, he believed that God would open a window to reach an entire people group, and that missionaries should just really be focused on the work of evangelism, so that souls would come into the kingdom and that churches would grow. He believed that healthy, reaching churches are growing churches, thus the church growth movement. In 1965, he was invited to come and found the School of World Missions at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I've actually attended classes there. I took cultural anthropology with Charles Kraft. I took a couple classes with Peter Wagner. I did perspectives, who I believe Ralph Winter was the author of. And so looking back now, I'm like, wow, I was really, really influenced by McGravan without even realizing it, and some of his other colleagues. But out of that course, out of that school, and out of the writings and the conferences and that whole movement, came this whole emphasis on really, missional effectiveness. It's also where the idea of the most effective form of evangelism is church planting. I used to think that was Tim Keller came up with that. That was Donald McGravan. And that's really been such a big part of the way I think about reaching cities, even my own attitude as a church planter. I've always seen it as sort of the next step in my life as a missionary. And I'm really grateful to McGravan for that. I'm curious to see what will happen next, as I think so is often the case. The church growth movement eventually kind of morphed and became other things in a lot of ways. I think was probably hijacked by the way we do church in America and our obsession with building big things and attracting massive crowds. I think the church growth movement really fed into that, and I'm excited to see what happens next as God continues to build his church and to lead the way in missions.